Brought to you by WikiVD Documentaries. Viking Age. The Viking Age is the period from the late 8th century to the mid-11th century in European history, especially Northern European and Scandinavian history, between the Germanic Iron Age and the Middle Ages. From a general Scandinavian perspective, it is the period of history when Scandinavian Norsemen explored Europe by its seas and rivers for trade, raids, colonization, and conquest. In this period, the Norsemen settled in Norse Greenland, Newfoundland, and present-day Faroe Islands, Iceland, Norway, Scotland, England, Ireland, the Netherlands, Germany, Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey. Though Viking travelers and colonists were seen at many points in history as brutal raiders, many historical documents suggest that their invasion of other countries was retaliation in response to the encroachment upon tribal lands by Christian missionaries, and perhaps by the Saxon Wars prosecuted by Charlemagne and his kin to the south, or were motivated by overpopulation, trade inequities, and the lack of viable farmland in the homeland. Information about the Viking Age is drawn largely from what was written about the Vikings by their enemies, and primary sources of archaeology, supplied with secondary sources like the Icelandic sagas. But the Vikings were not illiterates. Some history can be found on runestones. A good example of this is the larger of the two gelling stones. Further did travelers like Adam of Bremen and Ansgar visit Scandinavia by the end of the Viking Age, and wrote imperative works of chronicle style. And later did Saxo do the same. Also some Scandinavian early Middle Ages works like Havamal, Codex Regius, the Scanian law have also been of historical help. Historical considerations. In England, the beginning of the Viking Age is dated to the 8th of June 793, when Vikings destroyed the abbey on Lindisfarne, a centre of learning on an island off the northeast coast of England in Northumberland. Monks were killed in the abbey, thrown into the sea to drown, or carried away as slaves along with the church treasures, giving rise to the traditional prayer, A furore Normanorum libera nos, Domini, free us from the fury of the Northmen, Lord. 3 Viking ships had beached in Weymouth Bay 4 years earlier, but that incursion may have been a trading expedition that went wrong rather than a piratical raid. Lindisfarne was different. The Viking devastation of Northumbria's Holy Island was reported by the Northumbrian scholar Alcuin of York, who wrote, "Never before in Britain has such a terror appeared." Vikings were portrayed as wholly violent and bloodthirsty by their enemies. In medieval English chronicles they are described as wolves among sheep. The first challengers to the many anti-Viking images in Britain emerged in the 17th century. Pioneering scholarly works on the Viking Age reached a small readership in Britain. Linguistics traced the Viking Age origins of rural idioms and proverbs. New dictionaries of the Old Norse language enabled more Victorians to read the Icelandic sagas. In Scandinavia, the 17th-century Danish scholars Thomas Bartholin, Ole Worm, and Swedish scholar Olaus Rudbeck were the first to use runic inscriptions and Icelandic sagas as primary historical sources. During the Enlightenment and Nordic Renaissance, historians such as the Icelandic Norwegian Thormodus Torvius, Danish Norwegian Ludvig Holberg, and Swedish Olof von Dalen developed a more rational and pragmatic approach to historical scholarship. By the latter half of the 18th century, while the Icelandic sagas were still used as important historical sources, the Viking Age had again come to be regarded as a barbaric and uncivilized period in the history of the Nordic countries. Not until the 1890s did scholars outside Scandinavia begin to extensively reassess the achievements of the Vikings, recognizing their artistry, technological skills, and seamanship. Until recently, the history of the Viking Age had largely been based on Icelandic sagas. The history of the Danes written by Saxo Grammaticus, the Kievan Rus Primary Chronicle, and the War of the Irish with the foreigners. Today most scholars take these texts as sources not to be understood literally and are relying more on concrete archaeological findings, numismatics, and other direct scientific disciplines and methods. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVD Documentaries.